Cool, we're live. So welcome to another WP crowd. Today's going to be pretty special. We got some awesome guests on the show today that aren't part of our normal crowd, but hopefully they might become normal crowd-going people. Just to go through everything, we always start with introduction. So I'm going to start on my left with Jesse. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Jesse Peterson. I'm a Genesis developer in Tampa, and I started exploring the API a couple weeks ago, and my desk is now broken from hitting my head on it. So I started tweeting some of these people, and they were kind enough to say, well, let's talk about it for everybody's benefit. So that's why we're here.
Very cool. Josh?
Hi, my name is Josh Pollock. I make plugins, a company called Caldera WP, and I've written a couple things about the WordPress REST API for Torque and a few other places.
Very cool. Kirk?
Hi everyone, my name's Kirk. I work at Automatic as a developer on the theme team, and yeah, the coming core REST API has been a thing of interest for a couple months now, so a bunch of us have started playing with it and trying to get some stuff out there and get some conversations going, and here we are.
Very cool. Matt?
I'm Matt Cromwell. I work at wordimpress.com. We just built a Give donation platform, and we baked in our own API into it because WordPress core doesn't have one. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. And finally, Rachel.
Yeah, my name is Rachel Baker. I'm the lead engineer at thewirecutter.com and thesweethome.com. I'm also one of the co-leads of the REST API project, along with Ryan McHugh.
Very cool. And I'm Roy. I am a WordPress developer currently working at Disney. And I also write and talk a lot about the API. I've used it on a couple of my own projects, including Code Cavalry, which is an API-driven Angular website. So usually we do news and stuff right now, but there hasn't been too much going on in the realm, I think, the past week. A lot of the quote-unquote WP drama has seemed to been a little more quiet this past week, so I'm happy about that. Very, very happy about that. So I'll just get right into it. I think what I wanted to do was maybe go around and see if you guys can just define it for people. I try to define it all the time for anyone who asks me what it is, and I always feel like I'm always at a, up here in the stratosphere sometimes with trying to explain it. So maybe you guys will have a better way of explaining it to someone who has just no idea what an API or what JSON is, when they're just like, what?
So what do you want to explain? What is it in that sentence? Is it the WordPress REST API, or is it APIs in general, or what?
Let's go with the REST API. Let's assume that, someone knows what an API is, or an API is being in a consumable, way to get data. What is the REST API in WordPress?
I could do a quick general start. So normally when you go to a website, you type an address into a browser bar and you get back HTML. So an API can give you back, by going to a URL that hosts an API, that API can just give you back raw data. And one of the most common formats is called JSON, or JSON, J-S-O-N, JavaScript Object Notation, if I'm not mistaken. Right on. And so up until this point, WordPress has always essentially been the first version where you had to go to a URL that hosted a WordPress site, and you would get back HTML, and that HTML would be rendered in your browser. So now the project that Rachel and a bunch of people are working on is to get an API into the core of WordPress so that your WordPress site could provide simply raw data from that WordPress installation upon hitting a URL. And what that does is it opens up the potential to use front-end frameworks that can simply ask a WordPress site for a very specific piece of data and get that specific piece of data back. And what that does is it can change the way that we work with WordPress sites. So rather than just us writing PHP that extends the PHP of WordPress, we can actually use front-end frameworks like Ember or Angular or just JavaScript itself and use that to build whatever we want and then to selectively go and ask our WordPress site for very specific data. And that it can change the whole paradigm of how you build websites. So that's why it's very, very exciting to me.
Yeah, I would say actually WordPress already has an API. They have an XML RPC API, which is if you download the WordPress mobile app, and that's what it uses to make it so you can create posts and create pages.
Right.
The problem is that an XML RPC API isn't cross-platform or cross-programming language friendly necessarily, as well as parsing data in XML is not. XML is a document type format and not a data format, so XML isn't something you can necessarily parse with JavaScript or on a front end. Think about things you normally do with Ajax. You could, instead of hitting an Ajax endpoint that you create yourself, you could instead pull or post data to a REST API endpoint that returns or you send JSON to.
Okay. As I said, it seems like every time.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
It seems like every time we explain it, it's like it gets really complicated really fast, which is fine. It's a pretty complicated thing. Jesse, did you have a question?
Yeah, I've got one. So I understand that you can use it to effectively query data, but in what way is that any different than using the PHP queries of the database? Like, what advantages would this have? Is it like more efficient, or like less strain on the server, more creativity because people don't have to know PHP? Like, where is the advantage to it?
Sure. So if you're building a theme that is PHP, using WP query still makes the most sense. Where there is an advantage is, think about, so you build this site with this PHP query-based theme. So now you want a mobile app. How do you then query that data in a mobile app to then display it somewhere else? You can't use WP query in your mobile app, right? Like, the data that it's querying exists on your WordPress site. So I guess the best example I always give is like, think about Twitter, right? Like, Twitter has, if you go to twitter.com, there are queries that run there to show you your your page, but you can use other applications or even from your website send data or display data from Twitter, and that uses their API. So what this does is it gives your WordPress site that functionality where instead of being able to only present information from within the confines of WordPress itself, you can do it in other places.
Okay.
Make sense?
So we're not going to see a theme marketplace of API themes necessarily, right?
Well, you can build a theme right now that's built off of the REST API. The .org theme review team now allows that. Josh actually wrote a great blog article about this on Torque Mag the other day.
I think that was Roy, wasn't it?
I wrote one yesterday.
Yeah. Well, but I did want to jump in on what you do with the REST API. Yeah, Roy wrote a good article about it.
I'm sorry, Roy wrote the article. I'm so used to you writing the articles on Torque Mag, Josh.
I know. I front end belongs to Roy. But I did want to jump in and say that I've been playing around. I don't make themes, which is the funny thing. But I've been playing around with things that you could do to make a traditional theme better with the REST API. And to me, I think that the opportunities, not just things like Rachel already talked about, which is instead of using admin Ajax, just use a REST API endpoint. Admin Ajax has sort of been misused because it works for this. But I think there's a lot of stuff on the page in a traditional WordPress theme related to the current post, the author's name, what categories it's in, what tags it's in. And that suggests a UI pattern of like hunting and pecking through a website for information. Like I can click on a category, and that can take me to a category archive, right? These are things that WordPress does very well, but in a very traditional way, in the sense that I click that category link and I go to a archive page of terms in that taxonomy, right? And that makes sense because it would be insane that we got all of those and put them on the page, and then all of those put them on the same page, and then all of the posts by that author put them on the page. But having a very easy way to get all of that data, say with a REST API query, makes it so that, for instance, you could do on click, right? That's a very simple bit of JavaScript. Don't link out to my author template. Just go and make an asynchronous request to get all of the posts where a post author ID is the same, and then put that in the DOM, and then make those links. Same thing with categories, same thing with tags. Give me a list of all posts that are this tag and put it right there in the DOM. Can you do that without the REST API? Yes, but then you have to write a custom endpoint, you have to write a custom handler. And this gets into the whole reason why the REST API is so wonderful for WordPress developers' replacement for admin Ajax. Is there's kind of two ways of doing admin Ajax. One is that you write one giant handler that checks the nonce and validates it and turns it into a query, and then formats the return, and that's a mess. Or you come up with your system for abstracting that out, or you realize admin Ajax is inefficient, so you come up with your system for making a custom endpoint. And then hopefully you document that really well so that when somebody else shows up on the project, they can make sense of it. The idea that not only I can offload my formatting and my permissions and everything to people who are better at this than me, but that it could be a standard, so any WordPress developer should look at it and go, oh, we're hitting the post endpoint. That's exciting, and it means for theme developers, we can put a lot more information on demand available.
I think there's, and first too, Jesse, the fact that you're confused about why, if I already have a WordPress site with a WordPress PHP theme, why would any of this be any better? You're right, it's pretty confusing. It doesn't really seem like it could be anything better. Using your own API on your own WordPress site is definitely confusing. But yeah, there are advantages, like Rachel said, and like Josh just said. Another thing that makes me really excited about it, there are pretty immediate, you can get pretty immediate performance benefits. When you're on a site, look at Gmail. You click on Gmail, you have it immediately. You click on whatever, you have it immediately. Any WordPress site now that you don't have the API with, you click on it, you wait for the entire page load. You click on anything, you wait for the entire page load. And that's a realm of performance that's starting to look pretty old, and people are starting to get used to those really buttery, smooth, immediate UX experiences. So that's one thing. The other thing that I find super exciting about the potential of an API is that now we can actually build sites that blur the line between the front end and the back end. think about in-place text editing. Through the API, you could have you could make a site that shows posts, and then you can have an edit button on that. And then you could edit that text and save that through the API. All of a sudden, your users don't have to go to WP admin and fight with the layout of WP admin that doesn't look like what they expect, and then they have to go to the front side to preview it, or they have to go to the customizer, and the customizer doesn't make sense. All of those things, you can start really blurring the lines and being very selective of what your site displays and what it can do when you've got the power of the API with you. That, to me, is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to what people do with blurring that line between admin and front end. And that's something you just can't do with typical PHP server side.
And this also allows us to completely reimagine the dashboard the way that Rainmaker does with just the things that they want to show?
Absolutely. You get to reimagine 100% of WordPress. And yet at the same time, WordPress remains 100% backwards compatible because this is all done with an API. Like that's pretty great. That's why it's like we've got a lot of really exciting years ahead.
I think one of the most exciting things for me has always been being able to decouple WordPress period from a build. So basically being able to take WordPress and say, hey, admin people who don't know technology, I'm going to give you WordPress so you can edit your website and your web application if it needs to be something a little more on a larger scale. And you still have this beautiful UI and easy to use thing, while I can build something completely different, even if it's a Node application, and still grab all the data and everything that they're doing on the back end and integrate that pretty much seamlessly with what I'm doing. And it can be both server-side and not, but I've been doing a lot of client-side stuff, so building out applications which pull on data from multiple sources, so not just a WordPress website, but maybe pull on data from somewhere else as well, and then put that all together, make an application out of it, send and receive data from other places. So I think that's probably where I'm the most excited, about the whole thing.
And it's sad, when you go to this beautiful website and then you go to click on the blog and it goes to /blog and it's this WordPress site that's been like stuck onto the side of it like some sort of like Frankenstein head or something. It's like totally right. Where it's going to be the API lets you smoothly integrate everything together in one experience. That's just fantastic.
One thing that I get a lot of questions about, and I guess this is where I'm kind of not troubled, but I guess I just don't understand, is I get Steam's using it for things that you might be using admin Ajax for, but the question that ultimately comes up at that point is, okay, what about SEO? And I know a lot about client-side development and building things client-side, single-page applications, and I can answer the question for that. But where's that line kind of blurred when you're creating a theme that's powered by it? And I mean, I was talking about this in my article, which published yesterday, but isn't that kind of like you're letting them create small little things with the API, which is cool, but that's kind of ruining its potential for what you can really be doing with it. What do you guys see if people start putting in themes into the repo that are going to start requiring the API? What kind of things do you guys think they're going to be, using it for? Any thoughts on what we might be seeing in the more near future with themes that are powered by the API?
I love when nobody jumps on a question.
I was going to say,
it kind of indicates, I think everybody has to remember too, it's like this is extremely early days.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of time coming. We don't have to have all of the answers right now. I think of it as a really big time for exploration and fun right now. So I'm kind of curious to just see what people do with it. Will people use it to try to just mimic original, like, exactly what we have with server-side sites, or are they going to start doing interesting things and mixing it up? And I'm sure Rachel would agree with me that as we do that exploration, that's going to inform also, you know, what we would like the API to be and how it's going to end up being in its final version too.
Yeah, it's hard to build something and then just say you know how people are going to use it, especially a distributed API like this, where we're giving an API to anyone who has a WordPress site, and each of those sites are built for a different purpose and have different needs, where, you know, I'm not really sure how everyone is going to use it. But, you know, I think what it does is it opens, allowing the REST API in themes reduces the need for PHP in themes and opens us up for more JavaScript client-side rendering of data instead of the blocking server-side requests with PHP. So now, WordPress themes themselves get like a bad rap, because if you're an awesome front-end developer, you don't do WordPress themes because you have to know way too much PHP to do them right now. I think what this does is it allows us to kind of be more inviting to those communities to, you know, hey, if you're great at Backbone or Angular or whatever, come on over and build a WordPress theme. Let's see what you do. I think it's just being able to do that, to open our doors to other communities, means that we're going to see new and different things that we haven't seen before, and I don't know what those are going to be.
I think that's huge too. I mean, like, I went to an Ember meetup last night. Like, if we didn't have a core API coming, it would have been hard for me to see the value of, you know, that. But I mean, we're going to all get to sit at the table together and talk. I think that's fantastic between different communities. Like, that's really exciting. And I think Rachel's right. Like, you can't underestimate, or you can't overestimate what having this API in WordPress can do for our interaction and our future building with other communities too. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I had a very fancy lunch with Mason James yesterday at a taco dive, and we were talking about this podcast coming up, and he mentioned that this will partially do away with the WordPress way if we open this up to basically the kids, you know, who are Ember and Angular, who don't know PHP, and they can do anything with all these JavaScript frameworks. They're just going to query exactly what they want, and they don't need to know all of these WordPress things. I have a feeling that will cause some drama. We're probably going to say that's not what you were supposed to do with this. I'm probably talking my rear end about my prediction, but I think that this would have some pretty cool effects with the e-commerce side of things.
I think you're right. The one downside or sort of fear that I've seen, like I was giving a local talk at a local meetup a while ago, and it was quite palpable in the room that a bunch of developers were like, oh, does this mean that everything I've learned about theming is out the window now? Am I out of a job? Do I have to learn all of this to be able to make a living with WordPress now? No, not at all. You know, like, all of those skills stay with us. Like, PHP development with WordPress isn't going anywhere. It's like we're only getting more friends now. We're not losing anything. That's kind of the beauty of it. And PHP theming in particular, I mean, it's going to be around for a really long time. It's not going anywhere. It's so I think you're right. It's like we will have the option to do away with what you referred to as the WordPress way. But the WordPress way is still very much an option. Standard PHP development is not going anywhere. It's just we just now have more really robust options.
I wanted to throw out a rhetorical question, which is, does a REST API-powered theme recreate what we expect from a WordPress theme and have, you know, the theme review team has made a really good list of what a theme must do, and it's a very sensible list? Or does the REST API in a theme mean that we make something new that doesn't exist before. And it's that question Jesse said, like, oh, are we going to like stop? Are we going to throw out all the rules and make something that was supposed to be made? And I'm kind of like, it sounds great. Like, let's do new things.
I think, I mean, you've got both. I mean, there's definitely expectations of what people expect, like a user, if they were to install a theme, there's definitely expectations. You know, they want to be able to see the posts of their site. But I think where it really shines specifically for themes is it allows you so much to do on the user experience side. When you're handling things on the client side with through a REST API, and you have access to things like local storage, you know, now you can make your blog readable in the subway with no internet connection, because you don't have to do a page refresh every time somebody clicks on a post link. You know, the first time somebody hits a website with the REST API, the JavaScript in your theme could say, hey, you know what, load the last 30 posts, load the data for the last 30 posts, store it in local storage, and then, you know, when that person goes down into the metro or the subway, they can just keep on reading. You know, those are the sort of UX things that we can start to do now with the API that it just is not possible with server-side rendering.
I would also say I think having a WordPress themes be the way that they are makes it really easy to say, like, okay, that's where the title goes, that's where the content is, and maybe someone made some meta boxes to do these other things. I think where the web is going in general is much less content management-y than it has been in the past, where it's a lot more flexible of, you know, here we want to do, you know, list these events, but like in an outset, aligned with this content in this one special place. And I see, I dropped a link in of like the New York Times did this recently with their Voting Rights Dream Act. In their magazine, they did an article, and it's not content management at all, this article. And Pitchfork does a lot of this with like their features, where I think I hear a lot of like, is it going to be that things aren't going to be the WordPress way or be wrong? And like, I don't think there's anything that's wrong. I think what this does, it makes it so you can make content that works for you.
Totally agree. I think that there's going to be I don't think there's going to be too much of a shift. I think people who want to continue doing, you know, themes the way that they have been will continue to do so, and people who want to throw the rule book out the window and flip the table over and start something new will do that too. And this has always been, you know, again, where I get really excited about the API, because this is the one place that, the one time in the WordPress realm that we could actually have those two communities, these two like methodologies of the WordPress way and then everybody else, but everybody else in the WordPress way can kind of come together and use the same data, the same dashboard. You can give someone the same, essentially the same experience as far as administering a website, but the website itself can be completely different and completely unique from case to case. And that's, you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing what people come up with.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I just want to say is that, you know, as a WordPress community, we get very happy and being like, oh, we're 24% of the web, and that's amazing. But 58% of the web doesn't use a content management system at all. So, you know, if we want to grow beyond 24, it's not taking people away from Joomla or Drupal that's gonna move that number up much for us. It's only getting the people that don't use a content management system because either they don't like PHP or they don't like something about the WordPress way now, and getting them to use WordPress.
Yeah, no, and you know, there's something to be said about obviously not everything needs to be WordPress. Well, that's at least what I say. Some people might disagree with me, but the concept of a lot of new things can come out. So even you know, a lot of people don't talk about WordPress and maybe in the super enterprise level. Like a lot of people think WordPress and blogs, not necessarily WordPress and large scale business. Except now it's really becoming a thing. Ever since New York Times did theirs, I think it was the last presidential election, they used the API on it, and so I think the API is also going to play a big role in that realm as well. I've already started using it, where I work, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the higher level, probably enterprise level, larger scale education. I think you're going to see a lot more of the usage there as well, because they're going to be able to interact with people. Jesse asked in our chat about, could a multi-site running API basically display the health and stats of all the installs, all of the sites within it? And I think that's a perfect example, something that you might see more, even on an enterprise level, if not, on a larger scale business. And I think that's something that you could totally do with the API, whether you have like I was saying, doing it like a managed WP model where you have a client plugin, and then you have your master site that has, collecting all the data. You don't really need to even do that, I guess, because if you're just getting data from the API that's already built into default API, you don't need to create really another plugin for it. Like the API, theoretically at this point, because it's not in core, could be that satellite plugin. I'm going to be doing it with a satellite plugin, so we're going to have custom data, and I think that transitions us nicely into plugin development, because talking about themes, Matt, I know that you have created an API integration with your plugin Give. What was that like, and what do you expect to be integrating with the API with plugins?
Well, I didn't personally create it. Devin did. He's our lead developer, and he does really great work. But we decided to do an API for Give because there are so many ways in which people want to interact with their donation activity, and whether that be with their accounting software or a CRM. And we also wanted to make sure that we had the ability for users to use Zapier, which is a great service that hooks into APIs only, basically, to provide that data to a lot of other services. So you could basically hook your donor data, donor activity, into virtually any service out there that has an API through Zapier. But the only way we could do that was if we had the endpoints for Give. And we actually had a conversation on Twitter with Scott Kingsley Clark. He was like, well, just curious, why didn't you just extend the WordPress REST API? Well, because you don't want a plugin requiring another plugin. It just kind of looks silly. It doesn't feel professional, and your users are going to be like, why are you asking me to install another plugin in order to use your plugin? And we also had Give started off as a fork from EDD, and the EDD API, he rolled it on his own, and it was easy to use that and integrate that straight into Give as well. But it's for us, it would have been a no-brainer to extend the WordPress API if it was in core. It would be a no-brainer, and we actually think it probably would have been. It will be. Like as soon as it is in core, we'll probably adapt and change our API, because that it just would make a lot of sense and be a lot leaner, and be a lot more friendly to other services. So, but I mean, I agree. Like it's really great what the theme review team has done in terms of kind of leading the charge and saying, hey, here's a core part of WordPress that's open to using the API directly, and yeah, we'll see what happens. It'll be a big experiment. The problem is, I think the use cases are far more significant in the plugin realm, just because of the ways you can extend the API and add a whole bunch more endpoints, because plugins tend to be the ones that are creating additional content besides what WordPress core does out of the box. So especially, I think Kirk mentioned earlier, e-commerce, like tons of potential there for e-commerce applications. Even just Gravity Forms, form data, tons of applications there. So I really think once it's in core, that's when we'll know how incredible it is, personally.
Out of curiosity, why I'm surprised what you said about not wanting to have two plugins at the moment. You said that was a matter of perception of clients?
Yeah.
Not wanting to see two plugins?
No, it's not about seeing two plugins. It's about saying, here is a feature of our plugin that only works if you install somebody else's plugin. It just simply is not very professional. It doesn't have a very it doesn't give a good impression of our abilities, basically. And you want a plugin, especially a professional plugin that really is trying to sell itself as the go-to solution for donations. It needs to be a standalone solution. We don't want it to be relying on a theme. It needs to be theme agnostic, so it should also be able to stand on its own. That said, it's also an add-on model. So we have lots of add-ons that extend the functionality. So we could easily just like fork the WordPress REST API plugin and say, here's our API add-on. But it's just a matter of perception in a lot of ways. So, but we wanted to make sure that the API was a part of the free plugin, not an add-on.
I mean, that's kind of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Go.
Oh, I was going to say, I think especially with plugins, it is a problem. WooCommerce decided they wanted an API. They forked the WP REST API very early on, and their API is built on ours. There's plugins like Custom Contact Forms, which is a free plugin where the author of that, Taylor, he bundles our API in the install of his plugin, where to ensure that it's installed. But then if a user installs the plugin itself, or another plugin kind of does that same thing, and they're conflicting versions, I can see problems occurring there. And I think it is a barrier to entry for people. Like, if I think about the normal user of you download a plugin and it's like, oh, now you want me to download another plugin? Well, I read a bunch of blog posts that having too many plugins is bad. So screw this. I'm not gonna download that plugin. I'll do something else that doesn't require me to download another plugin.
Yeah.
To us, it's oh, you're just telling people to download the REST API plugin, no big deal. But
yeah.
To the average user, it is a problem. It's confusing. They don't understand why, and what does REST even mean? It's just not. I guess this is a great example of why. To me, it only works if it's in core.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to throw in. I think that the theme review team allowing the core REST API, allowing people to use the REST API as a plugin is bad. I think that the idea that themes have to work with WordPress is a great role that the REST API team, that the theme review team has always had. That your theme must work with WordPress. Period. It's such a smart role, and it's because look. I'm like a big advocate of Composer. It's really hard to. I know. The theme review team has right, but the theme review team has always said no dependencies, and dependencies are hard. As somebody who spends lots of time with Composer and is able to sit there and yell at the console and figure out why it didn't figure out why it wouldn't install because of a dependency mismatch, right? That's not something that we should push on users. And the idea that it just works with WordPress is a selling point for a plugin. If you are selling a plugin or trying to get people to use your free plugin, saying it works really well once you do this, and then you do this, and make sure you have this in this version of this, and then hopefully I've written a whole bunch of conditionals into my loading that prevents it from loading and throws up an admin nag to annoy the user because they didn't perform that whole list, right? That's something that now I have to do. right? I have to say, like, do you have the REST API installed? Is it of a sufficient version? Do you have, like, this other plugin installed? And hopefully I make a good annoying admin nag that people don't like, opposed to, like, just breaking things. This is, like, it's very hard as a plugin developer to say to people, this doesn't just work with WordPress. And that's what the REST API as a plugin is not WordPress yet.
I wouldn't want anybody to stop. I wouldn't want anybody to hear that, though, and say, and kind of throw up their hands and say, okay, we can't do anything until it's in core. You know, some of that is implementation, too. You know, if it's, I actually don't think it's such a horrible thing to, I admit it's not a great user experience to have to require a plugin. Like, I maintain a plugin that requires the keyring plugin for OAuth. And yeah, and it kind of sucks that you've got that bar up top that says, you know, install keyring too. People live, but I mean, there's also implementation options. You know, while this core REST API is a plugin, you can bundle it, like Rachel said, and then just be smart about your implementation, about how that bundle gets required. I wouldn't want anybody to hear our discussion and think that, you know, there's just nothing we can do until it's part of core. Having said that, you're right. It does bring up again the discussion of dependencies, which is, I think, about a 5 or 6 year ongoing conversation about core, because core doesn't have any dependency management. You know, something that that's like a model that we expect with something like Composer or Bower or whatever. So maybe we'll see that conversation starting to come up even more with core too in the coming years.
Yeah, I would actually say we're as the REST API team, we're actually in a bit of a bind because we need people to use the REST API as a plugin, or it's never going to get in core. So please, you know, as Kirk said, please don't take our discussion as talking about how the end goal is to get it in core and that is the ideal blue sky scenario. If between now and whenever that happens, if any of this interests you or you're interested in playing with it, please do, and please use it and figure out a way to bundle it or require it for your plugin, and build it to make a theme, because, you know, it's people doing things like that that give us the feedback to make it so we can make tweaks and changes and improve it so we can get it in core.
Yeah, I think the conversation around whether or not it goes into core has been really fascinating, and to me it is kind of a catch-22. On one side, from what I understood of what Matt Mullenweg said, is basically like we just need to see more use cases, or we just need to see that there is actually demand to use it. I think on one side that makes a lot of sense and it feels like wisdom. On the other side, I actually feel like it's kind of like if you build it, they will come kind of scenario. Just like what the theme review team is doing. You know, we don't know what awesome stuff the API is going to do for themes, but we're never going to know unless it's available in this way. So making it official, like yes, require the REST API for your theme, so that we can experiment and find out what awesome applications there are for it. I think that makes a lot of sense as well. So if this is maybe a small little test case before, in order to find more use cases, that sounds great. But you also can look around the plugin sphere and say, well, you know, there's maybe not a ton of plugins are using the REST API, the WP REST API as is right now. But plenty of them are implementing types of APIs on their own as well. And I mean, that's just more use cases where an API is just needed.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, you're going to see a lot of different things because plugins in the repo have been allowed to require or need the API. So if you look, even if you just search for, you know, REST API, you'll find 20 other plugins that exist that are just there to help add on to the API. I think one thing that we kind of glanced over and during our little conversation, for anyone who's listening or watching or will watch, The one thing that I love about the API as well is it's super extendable, and that's where like plugins, like Matt's Give plugin or some of my plugins that are in the repo are really gonna are going to really require, and why they would require the REST API. It's because while the REST API gives you a plethora of endpoints to tap into to get data for your WordPress site, sometimes you want something a little more custom. Sometimes you want brand new data that they're not already going to give you. So the REST API is super extendable. You can create your own endpoints and create your own, even namespacing your own API, basically based on, so you almost have your own API that's just powered by the REST API because it's namespaced separately, which is really cool. And so plugins already can require it, and I think we're seeing some pretty cool plugins already out there in the repo and in the marketplace that are requiring it and allowing you to do some pretty cool things separate of the theme.
I totally agree. Rachel and the other developers have done an amazing job in making the, I guess that's pretty much as of the version 2. It's so easy to extend it. It is really, really easy to work with. It would be a shame to think that somebody was out there thinking, well, it's only a plugin right now, so I don't really want to touch it, so I'll just make my own everything. That's really missing a huge opportunity. The core plugin, even before it gets into core, is so easy to work with. It's fantastic. I'm using it right now. Yeah, it's a total huge kudos. So when I use it to look at theming stuff, there are a few things that are missing or that are in PRs that aren't merged yet. So so I've just been making my own plugin that extends those things so that I can keep on working. It's fantastic, and it's and as for the future of it, it's hard for me personally to imagine WordPress without a REST API. So I hope we can all do what we can to make it to get core. It's only going to be a benefit for everybody.
Thank you. I guess I would just like to say that
I was just going to throw in that
kudos. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was just going to throw in real quick that the best part is that it's the REST API is essentially like WP Query to us in a sense, right? The WP Query comes built out of the box, and we go to this URL, and it makes a query, and it prints it through a template. But that the REST API is really wonderful for making your own thing out of the same tools. Just like we use WP Query or WP User Query to make our own, hey, give me this random collection of users. And the infrastructure is all there, and if we do choose to use it in our plugins because it's a feature of WordPress or because we're more adventurous, and I'm on the fence on all that, it's going to make it really easy for us to make our Give endpoint or whatever it is, whatever product that we're using, and just have that as a thing that's just available. And we can click on and off in our admin, and we can use that as almost an easy way that from the very beginning we're creating the API that can create the service part of our plugin. That not just integrate with other services or integrate with our own services, and as plugin and product people, that's a whole new world that can become like baked in, accepted. And that's that's new possibilities for user happiness, and that's new possibility for money. And I like that.
Look at AppPresser. AppPresser came out, and they fundamentally run on the REST API. Their product being creating a mobile app from your WordPress site, whether it's e-commerce or not. That's like fundamentally why you would use the API, right? That was like one of the first examples Rachel gave, and that's what they're doing. They created a plugin which allows you to take your WordPress site, create a natively run mobile app, and it's all done through the API. It's pretty cool.
And all I wanted to say was just that the kudos for how flexible and extensible version 2 of our API is. I just wanted to, say that all those should be directed towards Daniel Bachhuber and Joe Hoyle. Like, they came on for version 2, and this making it easy for folks to extend the REST API for their custom post types, taxonomies, and create custom endpoints was something we really want to make easier for version 1, and they helped us do it for version 2. So that was just wanted to.
So
and none of that would have happened if people hadn't been using the version 1 API plugin and giving feedback to the team. So
yes, completely true. Yep, feedback helps.
Yeah, another question I get, and I know that we started late, we're kind of running late, so I'm going to wrap this up. But Rachel, a question I get sometimes is, so okay, someone wants to come in right now and want to use the REST API. Right now, there's 2 versions out there in the repo. Which one should they be using?
Use version 2.
Version 2?
Yep.
Even though it says not to use it for production or anything like that.
That is going to change in a few days. So by the time someone listens to this and actually goes down to do it, use version 2.
Okay. I really like version 2. I spent a little bit of my time converting my Angular theme and some of my plugins to support version 2. It's fantastic. I think even I got a pull request from Josh last night for one of my plugins for version 2. And I highly recommend it. We're going to be switching a lot of things over, and it is really cool. There's definitely you guys have taken the extensibility of V1 and really taken it to the next level with V2. And I'm sure that's partially want to get into core, but man, there's some really cool functionality. From a developer point of view, actually a question I had, and I was gonna just post it on somewhere else, but can you get rid with V2? Can you get rid of all the default post endpoints? Can you just say, all of these default ones that come in, I want them all just to be off. I only want custom endpoints.
Yes, you can deregister the endpoints. I don't remember how to do it off the top of my head, but there's a filter for the endpoints we register by default, and then you can just hook into that filter and deregister them.
Awesome.
If you ask me nicely, I'll send you the code.
Yeah, I'm like there's a way to do that in version 1 as well, by the way.
You can remove the action that adds it, or there's a filter for each you can filter by namespace or just endpoint.
So you can get rid of a whole namespace on a whole. I just don't want this whole namespace to work anymore.
Yeah, I have a code example that goes through, loops through them, and says if it has this namespace, delete.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, we're running a little bit late, but this is a really good conversation. Any last minute remarks, or I don't think we have any more questions. So, Jesse, how you feeling? Are you going to be using the API anytime soon?
Yeah, I was asking some use case questions in chat, and my suspicions of the power of the API have been confirmed. So I think I have a couple things I want to try as soon as I learn enough JavaScript.
Okay. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand. I think that was something we're talking about PHP and stuff earlier, but I'm not sure. I mean, from my point of view, from what I do, yeah, if you want to really tap into the API, JavaScript can be something really important. I'm not sure if, but I think you can still use it pretty easily without knowing any JavaScript, but you're not going to get any of the front-end UI awesomeness that, Ajax and all that without it. But you can still use PHP to do your WP remote get and all those kind of things. So.
Oh, I did not know that. I thought it had to be JavaScript.
Nope.
No.
Conception eliminated.
Yep. I use it.
Or if you're querying another site, WP safe remote get.
Yes, safe remote get.
Okay.
All right.
I just
cool.
got a lot happier.
Yeah. I guess the remark I have is just that if you're interested, any of this is interesting to you, please visit github.com/wp-api/wp-api, which is where the core API plugin is. If you back one of those paths out, you'll see all of our available plugins, where there's authentication plugins there as well. We have a lot of people using our plugin, and we have 59 contributors to date, and we would love to have many, many more. So if you are using it, please submit a pull request and help us dive in and get this ready for core.
What's your Slack channel?
And in the Making WordPress Slack, what do you call that? Like a Slack room, I guess?
Team.
It's this Slack team. We are the Bang Core REST API room, and you can pop in there and ask questions. Where then I can give you wrong answers, and then Ryan can come in and give you right answers. So hop in anytime.
Cool. All right. Thank you guys for joining. For anyone that's watching, thank you. See you next week.